Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm very excited to welcome Sherri Nunn to the podcast today to talk about Blacula, released 50 years ago in August of 1972. How are we doing, Sherri?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me back on. I'm really excited to talk about Blacula.
Blacula is our film today. Had you heard of this movie before? Had you seen it before?
I've seen it before. Yes, okay. I have. Yep.
This is a movie I've known about for many, many years, but I've never seen it until last night. So you had seen this before. How long ago?
In October, actually, because I had decided that I do 31 days of horror movies, and I try to watch something new for most of the month. And this was one of the new ones that I watched.
Oh, cool. So every October you watch one horror film a day for the month?
Theoretically, sometimes it's two because I miss a day. So
okay. And you try to find a few films that you haven't seen before?
Yeah, I usually try to come up with kind of a little bingo card, and I have to try and fill that bingo card. So with different things.
It's a struggle for me because I love horror films. It's my favorite genre, and I've seen so mmany of them. It's always a treat to see something new, especially an older film that for whatever reason it's just passed me by. And that's kind of why I'm doing the podcast in like a small way, is like to see all the horror films of the 70s that I might have missed. There's still a lot I haven't seen. So
yeah, I always think I've seen a lot of 70s horror movies, and then I look at ones that were released in the 70s. I'm like, I really haven't seen as many as I thought I have.
Yeah. So you've been on the podcast a few times. Last year we talked about Sounds of the Lambs on its 30th anniversary. And we talked about Strangers on a Train on its 70th anniversary. That was a fun episode. Go find that one.
That was.
And then you were on the regular podcast for The Big Dollhouse with Pam Grier.
Yes. Yes.
So very excited to have you back. It's been too long. And so it's our first like horror film for the regular podcast. So before we get into our movie today, I'd love for you to just talk about kind of your history with the horror genre. What do you love so much about it?
Well, as a kid, I was not allowed to watch horror movies because I had terrible night terrors and my parents wanted to get some sleep. So when I discovered horror movies, I became like a fiend. And I think because it was a safe place for me to experience the things that I experienced during my night terrors. So I've just kind of devoured them since my early teens. It's definitely my favorite genre of movie. I have a podcast myself where we just talk about horror movies. So lots of fun.
And that's the Scaredy Cats podcast?
That is, yes.
Our listeners, go check that out. That's a fun podcast that Sherri does. I thought about doing, before I started Film at 50, and I was thinking about for a few months there, like right at the beginning of the pandemic, when all of a sudden everyone was doing a podcast, I thought I should do one. It'd be fun. It'd be like, I'm just like at home all day by myself, like be fun to get on here and talk movies with people. I thought first I would do a horror film podcast because that's my favorite genre. But I was like, but do I want to only talk about horror movies every time? I kind of liked the idea of being able to do a lot of different kinds of genres. And so I settled on doing this, which I had been doing for a few years already, just on the side. I was watching films from 50 years ago anyway. So just kind of like, it kind of worked out. But if I hadn't done Film at 50, it would have been a horror film podcast. That would have been a lot of fun.
Well, I think you've got a really good, take on movies, right? Because you can look back and, like you said, do all kinds of different genres, but there are a lot of horror movie podcasts.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. And I thought, I'm still going to talk about a lot of horror films. I mean, very rarely does a month go by on Film at 50 where we don't talk about something in the genre. Usually every month I've got one, because I'm always like researching, like, okay, in the summer of 72, what horror films came out? And not to say I would ever bypass a major title for a horror film, but sometimes if it's between an historical drama or a horror film for mid-June, I'll pick the horror film. Not to say that I'm bypassing though, any obviously important films. I'm trying to talk about the big ones for the podcast, and occasionally I'll throw in a smaller title if it's something that I feel is worth talking about. But I could not get past the summer of 1972 without looking at Blacula, which is I think it's kind of an important film in the genre in that it's the first Black vampire lead in a movie, right? So I think we have to talk about that. So as we get into it, I have some research about the movie, but I'd love to just kind of get your initial thoughts on this one. So what do you think of Blacula?
Oh my gosh, I love this movie. It's so fun. William Marshall, who plays Mamuwalde, also known as Blacula, is so incredible, and he brings this gravitas to a movie that could be kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I would say that for the most part, vampire movies in the 70s and late 60s were kind of moving towards the ridiculous. So he brings this kind of like seriousness to the role, which just makes it like so watchable. He's just incredible.
That was my biggest surprise watching this last night. I thought with a title like that, it's not going to be a comedy, but it's going to be really silly. A lot of winking at the camera. This movie is not going to be serious in any way. And I'm watching this last night. I'm like, there's some clunkiness to scenes here and there, but it really is taking the genre seriously. And you're right, in the lead role, he's not playing this as a joke. Like he's taking it seriously. The loss of his wife, his new circumstances, and it's genuinely creepy at times. And I thought his performance was really strong. And I was surprised by that. I was very happily surprised.
Yeah, I feel like he kind of harkens back to the old Universal monster movies where, you feel bad for the Wolfman and you feel bad for Frankenstein, even though they're monsters, you have this like emotional connection to them that you get with Blacula. Like he did not choose this life in any way, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but yeah.
Yes. One thing I thought was really interesting in the movie is that he's always wearing his cape, even when he's going into like clubs and restaurants. And there's sometimes a line from a character at a time, like what's he wearing? But for the most part, they embrace him. And I'm like, would they embrace this guy in a cloak?
I mean, it was the 70s. So.
I'm like, interesting. I'm like thinking like today, if I was sitting in a restaurant, some adult man walked in with a cape, I think there'd be a lot of people staring, right?
And going, what on earth? There's actually the side character, I think his name is Skillet, where he's like, I want that cape. And then he actually says he's going to beat him for the cape. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Then.
Yeah. So I like that aspect about it. You could tell watching it that it's kind of low budget. They didn't have a lot to like throw in it, like to makeup effects, and like some of the violent moments are a little, I was like a little creaky. But you can tell there's like a great love for the genre in this movie. Doesn't feel like the work of someone who was like, oh God, I have to make a vampire movie. This is beneath me. It didn't feel that way at all. Like it felt like a filmmaker who was trying to do something with the genre, something that we hadn't seen before. And since I've been doing this podcast for 2 years, I've seen a few vampire movies. A lot of them are very stale. They feel like they could have been made in 1957. And this movie felt like of its time. We're not quite into Exorcist, Texas Chainsaw Land yet. That's coming. That's better. But like, I could feel like this felt a little bit more like an early 70s horror film. It didn't feel like a late 50s, early 60s, which some of them feel like that all the way through.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it blows my mind. So William Crane, the director, was 22 when he directed this.
Oh man, I didn't see that. I looked up his name and some of his credits. He was 22 years old.
22 years old. So
was this his first film? I read that he had been mostly directing television before he got this.
Yeah, I think it was his first film. I think he did like the Mod Squad, like episodes of the Mod Squad and stuff like that beforehand, but I'm pretty sure this was his first film.
So he was directing television when he was like 19.
Yeah. Incredible.
Back when you could do that. I love the stories about Steven Spielberg and how I think he dropped out of college at 19, 20, something like that. And he got a contract with Universal, but he was working at Universal Studios where a lot of the crew were still in their 50s and 60s and years old. And they were looking at this kid like, who's this kid think he is, trying to be a director? And so Steven Spielberg, after he made that one night gallery segment with Joan Crawford was that 69, I want to say, he struggled finding work for about a year and a half because it was hard for anyone to take someone that young seriously as a director in the industry. And I wonder if that affected William Crane too. But I feel like Blacula is the kind of movie that some of the older filmmakers would have been like, oh yeah, no, kid, you go make this little vampire horror film, right? Something that Spielberg wasn't. I couldn't have seen Spielberg in his early to mid 20s making a horror film like this. You know, he made Duel and Jaws, which are kind of like horror films, but a little bit more elevated. But I think William Crane being 22 years old, I think he shows a great eye in this movie. I really like what he did with this. It could have been really clunky throughout.
Yeah.
And I liked it as a movie, just as a movie. I thought it was really entertaining. It could have been rough around the edges throughout the whole thing. And I thought that what he did with this was pretty solid.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it's fairly, and maybe it's because he's young and you tend to be more idealistic and when you're younger, or so they say. But I mean, it's very progressive, I think, for its time. Looking back, 50 years later, maybe not as progressive as it would be if it came out now, but there's definitely some things in there that you're like, wow, that really stands out for 1972.
Yeah, something that I noticed towards the beginning, it's something I'm looking at throughout all the films I dissect for this podcast is, are there gay characters? like occasionally you see one. We talked about last year, we talked about Shaft, a very famous blaxploitation film from 1971, where there's a scene in a bar with a proudly gay character. And it's a great scene. And I was really happy with that. It wasn't quite at the level of that character in Shaft, but at the beginning of Blacula, we get it's two gay men, right? In like getting near the coffin, and they're kind of disposed of very quickly as the first victims. But I'm like, okay, cool. That's kind of progressive in this little horror film from 72 to have clearly two openly gay characters in that scene. I thought that was really great.
Yeah. And I mean, they're you're right, they're just disposed of pretty quickly, but then you have their friends come and mourn them, and they're like sad. So they're not ever made, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. They're not treated as disposable because they have, these three friends that come to see, well, one of them at the funeral home. And they clearly are very saddened by their friend's death, and they are very openly gay. I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be a couple.
Are they a couple? I couldn't quite figure it out. It's so brief in the movie. I couldn't figure out, are they in a relationship? It would make sense that they would be, but I couldn't tell if they were in a relationship or if they were friends. I couldn't tell.
Yeah, I guess it's not explicit. I just assumed they were a couple.
Okay.
And I mean, an interracial couple in 1972 as well, probably pretty shocking at the time.
Yeah, but I'm watching the scene. I'm like, I'm wondering what are the young audiences in the summer of 72? How are they reacting to the scene? Like, I'm curious about that. Like, I wonder if there was talk back to the screen, like, what the hell's going on here, or if they were embracing of this moment. I don't know. I just think it's really cool, right?
That's a really good question. Yeah, how did the audience receive it?
I do that a lot for this podcast when I did that last week. We talked about Deliverance recently, and I'm like, what would this have been like in a crowded theater in the summer of 72? I always try to put myself there, because it's so different watching a 72 movie now than it would have been then. It's just like we've had so many years, so much cinema, so much growth for the medium, and it's like, you have to remember, like in 72, nobody has seen anything that came after, and everything that we've seen. And it's like, and it's in some of the stuff, it's like, wow, something they've never done before must have been amazing to see for the first time in 72, including a Black vampire protagonist in a vampire movie that does feel very, very different from the other kind of vampire movies we were getting at this time. I mean, think about it. This is still the era of Christopher Lee, right?
Yeah,
the Hammer
exactly.
Productions. We're talking about one later this year. He was in a movie called, I think, Dracula AD 1972. Yes. So that's kind of what audiences know at this time. It's that, and then they go back to like Bela Lugosi era. That's like kind of all they know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's been something that I have found interesting, looking at not only kind of looking at the history of horror films throughout the decades and how they change, but you could even just look at vampire movies. How do vampire movies look from decade to decade? They are always changing, usually for the better. Usually they get better. My favorite TV show is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And
yes, me too.
Do you like that show? That series is just one of my favorites. Just so great. And the vampire genre and seeing kind of how that has evolved over the last 15 years or so in films. I'll talk about one at the end as a divine double feature pairing, but I feel like you can't really get away with making a vampire movie like this now. We're kind of at a different stage of the genre.
Mm-hmm. I did read that they're doing a reboot of it, though.
I did read that too. On June 17th, 2021, it was announced that a reboot was in development. Now, development, that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to get made. It just means
that's true.
They've announced it as a possibility. I've always said, like, until they are rolling the cameras, until they are shooting, it's never a for sure thing. But apparently a few months ago it was announced as a co-production between MGM, Braun Studios, and Hidden Empire Film Group, with Roxanne Avent producing and Dion Taylor and Micah Ranum co-writing. Taylor will also direct the film. I looked real briefly. I didn't see that it had started shooting by any means. It's not like it's coming out in October, but I feel like we talk about it all the time. Like, could this movie be made 50 years later? And I feel like there's enough title awareness of Blacula that there would be an audience for this movie now. I mean, we just got Candyman last year, right?
That's true. That is true.
And I feel like Blacula, but it's like, how do you make Blacula now? Like, I feel like if it looked just like it is in this 72 movie, I don't think it would work today. You'd have to update it in a certain way, right?
I could see them taking, so I like the Candyman reference, because I think they could take kind of the main themes of the movie and then just kind of migrate them to modern times. One of my favorite, I wrote it down, but I'll mention it now. There's a line where they reference sloppy police work when it comes to Black victims. I mean, they could definitely migrate, the theme of the Black community and police into modern times and make it something really powerful.
It's tough, because if they were to push that too hard in a movie called Blacula, the audience might be like, I mean, I think today's audience would approach a new Blacula like thinking it's just going to be a romp and a fun ride.
Yeah,
and so I think they'd be kind of like, what's happening here?
This is not what I thought it was going to be.
They'd have to really promote it, like they'd have to really, like a Jordan Peele production. Like they'd have to really like in the promotional materials show that, no, this is a very serious version of the story. Yeah. But the original's pretty serious. As I said at the beginning, I was kind of happily surprised that it's not just like winking at the camera. I thought it was going to be really stupid.
Yeah.
in a fun way. I was when I first watched it. It's going to be bonkers, silly, stupid.
Yeah.
And it has a couple moments like that, but not much. It's really taking things seriously. We get this nice romance relationship between Blacula and this woman who resembles his wife. Her name's Tina in the movie, right?
Yes.
And there, at one point, he says, "I'm not going to hold you against your own will. If you don't want to be with me, I never want to see you again, and I'm going to go." And he's like leaving her apartment or whatever. And she's like, "Wait, don't go." I'm like, really? I mean, I don't know if it's not a good way to start your relationship with someone. If they're like, "Oh, you remind me of my dead wife and I want to be with you." And it's been like a day. And he's like, "Well, if you don't want to be with me, I'm going to leave and I never want to see you again." That's not a good way to start. I was kind of surprised when she's like, "Wait." And then she hugs and kisses him at the door, at the doorway. I'm like, okay. True. And then it's like welcoming into the club the next night with his cape on. She's like, "Oh, here he is." Did you like that relationship between them?
I sort of, because I'm a big Dracula nerd.
Okay, good.
And I liked that it kind of calls back to Mina Harker in the original Dracula, like in the book and in the original Dracula. So Mina and Tina, I'm pretty sure, was a pretty deliberate nod. And I mean, that's kind of similar to how the Dracula story plays out, is that Mina kind of falls under his spell and then is kind of powerless to resist him. And so I think that there was some kind of supernatural element there where Tina, in this case, is just kind of taken under his thrall, I guess, and then has no way to resist. So when he says, "Oh, I'm going to leave you alone," she she has to say, yes, no, don't.
Well, I mean, he is very handsome. He's tall. He's older than she is by at least 10 to 15 years, maybe more. Mm-hmm. So there's that, but he's also very handsome, very charismatic with that deep voice. And I could see a young woman like, oh, take me now, kind of a thing. And even with his cape on, I don't know, that would kind of do it in for me, but I'd be like, remove the cape and I will think about it. But yeah, I like them together. I thought it was predictable as we get towards the end. I'm like, she's probably gonna die.
Her death is horrific, though. It's so horrific.
Yeah. So a police officer shoots at him, right? He's shooting at him, but he hits her and she falls to the ground and she dies kind of in his arms. And I love how he just goes completely berserk on that officer. He's just like pounding him against the wall into the ground. Yeah, that's a good scene. I thought we could have seen like the gun, like the bullet like hit her in a way. It's kind of like off screen. You don't really get that sensation, but it's a low budget film from 72, so it's okay. It was kind of that like, oh.
Yeah. Her sister's reaction though is like incredible, like, because her sister's there, right? And she's like,
oh right, yeah, she like runs towards her, right?
And I think that for me had a lot of emotional resonance, because Michelle and Gordon are my favorite characters in the whole movie. And so Michelle seeing Tina I was gonna call her Mina die is just like broke my heart. Which also not something you're gonna expect from a movie called Blacula, that it's gonna break your heart.
Yeah, and we should say it's 93 minutes. It's short. It's like a breezy kind of entertaining. There's not really, for me, there wasn't like a lull of like a 10-minute part of the movie that kind of slowed down and like it has a nice deliberate pacing to it. It's never like too action packed in your face with its pace. It's like it's a nicely done in that regard. And I mean, if there was one major criticism, I wish there had been a little bit more atmosphere in the movie. Did that bother you at all? Like, it's very, I don't know, it has that contemporary feel of 72, you know, like a more modern film, which I like. But there were some stretches where I'm like, it is a vampire film. I'd like a little bit more kind of creepy eeriness atmosphere to the night scenes. I mean, the last 20 minutes of the movie, they're just like walking around this warehouse and like tunnels and stuff. And I'm like, I feel like there could be a little bit more like in terms of the filmmaking craft with the atmosphere. It doesn't need to be like smoke coming in from every doorway.
Full moon.
Like we're in the Bela Lugosi movie. But I felt like there was a missed opportunity there in at least a few scenes. I don't know.
I would agree. I think the only scene that really kind of got me in terms of atmosphere was the scene where there's a character who's developing film in a dark room.
It's the best
scene.
And
she's bathed in red light and it's incredible. And you're just so tense because you know something's going to happen. I think that's the only really truly atmospheric scene that you get.
I thought that was the best, like, scary scene in the movie. Like the look of that room with the red, and she's developing the film, seeing that that she's hugging like just nobody. And she's like, I was there. I took the picture. Like, he was standing there. And then she hears a noise and she kind of like looks through the curtain. There's no one there. And I don't know what they did on set, but he like does this floating thing when he comes at her. He like comes out of the dark kind of a thing, and he's like floating with his mouth open and his eyes big. And it's like maybe 3 seconds, but it's like really quick and scary. And then he just like grabs her and pulls her down. And I was like, okay, that's a great horror movie scene. That was well done.
Yeah. The other one that I think was kind of scary is the scene where they're at the morgue. Well, there's two people at the morgue. There's the supposedly dead body of the taxi driver. And then there's the coroner, and there's the slow motion of her coming towards him.
Yes. The man who's at the end of the hallway, right? The guy who looked like, I think he's the actor. Have you seen House on Haunted Hill, the William Castle film from 1959? Yeah. He's in that movie. It was like cool to see him in another horror film. And it like slow-mo's the footage, right? Like her running and she's like, ah. Yeah. And he's just like not putting up a fight. He's just like, ah.
He just leans against the wall a little bit.
When you watch a horror film and you know that person has 5 seconds before they're dead, and you're like, if I were in that position, would I just stand there and go, ah? Like, I think I would at least try to like maybe run the other way. I don't know.
I know myself too well. If I tried to run away, I would just trip over my feet. So I would be the person for sure.
When you watch like those 80s slasher movies, right? And it's like, there's so many scenes where it's like, if you, instead of screaming, like you could run.
Yeah.
But then I guess the movie's over or something. I don't know.
Yeah. You don't want to ruin the fun.
So a few more pieces of trivia on this movie. So the movie was in production January to March 1972. While Blacula was in production, William Marshall worked with the film producers to make sure his character had some dignity. His character name was changed from Andrew Brown to, how do you say it? Mumalad? How do you say it?
Mamuwaldi?
Mamuwaldi.
Yes.
And his character received a background story about being an African prince who had succumbed to vampirism. Blacula was shot on location in LA, with some scenes shot in Watts, and the final scenes taken at the Hyperion Outfall Treatment Plant in Playa del Rey. It felt to me like an LA, like a California story. Didn't feel like New York or something. Like I could tell like early on that this was an LA film.
Yes. Yeah, it definitely felt that way for sure.
Yeah. Include even just like the club atmosphere, like that, some of those scenes. I'm like, this is Los Angeles. So
how weird is that too? That scene, like the first scene at the club where you have a full-on musical number. Like, I mean, I loved it, but it's got to be like one of the only vampire movies that has.
So we just talked about the movie Superfly, which also came out around the same time, and that's another movie where like the movie's plot stops for a long 3-4 minute musical number in a club. And I watched that. We talked about that movie about 3 weeks ago. And then I'm like watching this I'm like, that's like a kind of a thing with these blaxploitation kind of movies. Like we stop the plot to show a musical number on a stage for a few minutes. Kind of got a David Lynch vibe. Like we gotta have someone singing. But it's done so well in Blacula. I love those three on stage, and they're doing like a whole choreographed dance number while they sing. I'm like, I don't know what this has to do with the plot, but this is great. More movies should do that now.
They really should. If Blacula didn't die, though, I feel like he would have stolen that one guy's little like headbands that he had on to add to the cape.
Oh, right. I mean, if he hadn't died at the end, he could have gone back to the club and he could have gone up there and he could have ended with a dance number, like he's singing something. That's then right. the credits roll. That's the kind of movie I thought I was getting. I thought it would have, like, when they're singing and dancing on stage at, what was that, 25 minutes in, something like that. It's going to end with Blacula just rocking out at the end. And that's not how we get it all. So this movie ends with Blacula not being killed by someone else, right? He basically kills himself by going out into the sunlight because he's lost his true love. And he succumbs to the sun. And like the final shot of the movie is his face like melting off and then becoming a skeleton.
And maggots. Many maggots.
Which, when I did not know until researching it this morning that there is a 73 sequel. I didn't know. I've known a lot of the movies I've talked about had a sequel. This one I was not aware of that. So I'm like, wait, how is there a sequel, Sherri?
It's the magic of horror movies, Brian.
I mean, he had maggots coming out of his like open eye sockets, and then we saw the skull.
Michael Myers was set on fire and decapitated, and he still came back. So I don't know.
Michael was not decapitated. That was the ambulance driver.
Right. You're right. It was the ambulance driver. That's very true.
That was so stupid. That was maybe the dumbest plot development in horror movie history. Because the
ending of H2O
is so great.
Yeah.
Like I'd rather that story had wrapped up in H2O, and then we got the new reboot with Curtis, which is its own separate thing. Fine. but to like everything that Resurrection does is just push aside the glorious ending of H2O, and that's never sat well with me.
It's true. It's very true.
So Scream, Blacula Scream is the 1973 sequel. I wonder, like, I don't think I'll do it for the podcast, but I'm very excited to watch it and just see how do they come up with something that makes sense to bring him back. You should
do it for the podcast because it has Pam Grier in it.
She's in the sequel?
And she's like a voodoo priestess. She is amazing.
No. Now I might have to. She's got some good ones coming. We got Coffee and Foxy Brown coming in the next, I want to say 18 months, something like that. So we will get to some more Pam Grier. I just read that she's the next podcast for the Turner Classic Movies podcast. They're going to do a series on Pam Grier and her career. I'm very excited for that. Have you listened to any of those TCM podcasts? They're so good.
I have not. I should listen to them.
They're so fantastic. They've done, they did one on Lucille Ball recently that I listened to, and it's just like, it's very well researched, and they have like interview clips play throughout the podcast. It's not just a few people talking like in real time. It's like they have like clips and interviews and things, you know, going through many decades, and it's really fascinating. So I'm excited to see what they do with Pam Grier. Her career is just starting in 71, 72 era, and her like big films are coming. Like that's like 73, 74. She should have been in the first one though.
She should have been. Would you have cast her as Michelle or Tina? Though?
I don't know. I think she would have worked out very well in this movie. Let's see. And then a few other pieces of trivia here. So this I thought was interesting. So I read American International Pictures held special promotional showings at 2 New York theaters. Anyone wearing a flowing cape would receive free admission.
Wow.
If like when I was in college, and if like the vampire movie was opening and I knew I could wear a vampire cape and go to the movie and it'd be free, I would have done it.
100%. Yep.
And then I would have walked in and then taken the cape off and good to go.
Oh, I totally would have worn that cape to the end of the movie.
You would have worn just sitting there.
Yeah. Use it like a blanket, you know, if it gets a little cold.
It's like, speaking of Halloween H2O, opening night, seeing that movie when I was 14 or whatever it was, 13. Someone had a Michael Myers mask on with the outfit and the mask and everything, and sat right in front of me for the entire movie, never moved the head. Like sat like this the whole time. And then he gets decapitated at the end. And I said to him, like, I think that's it for you, Michael, or she got you, Michael, or something. And then, I mean, I seriously was kind of like looking at him in the corner of my eye, and I never saw him move. And he like did this thing. He turned and looked up at me. Like, and I'm like, oh no. And I was 13. And I was like, oh my God. Like I was like the whole walk to the car, I kept looking over my shoulder, like worried he was going to be at least like pretending to come after me, but he didn't. He like stayed in the theater or something. It was something else. But I'm like, that would have been really uncomfortable to watch a movie with that mask on for an hour plus.
Like hot, and I feel like you wouldn't be able to see a lot through it.
It was my Halloween costume when I was in middle school for 2 years, and it got really hot. Like even at night outside, it would get hot in that mask. I didn't like it, so I didn't wear it the third year. I was like, I'll do something else. No more masks for me. My Halloween
costume last year was Lori.
Oh, you were Lori last year?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to see a picture of that. Like, how did you do that costume?
I just basically wore a blue shirt and jeans, brown boots, carried a knife around with me, and had a long blonde wig on.
Okay.
And so there's literally a picture of me like this, hiding behind a couch like this.
That's awesome. So like for my job every year, I have to like wear a costume to school, and it probably wouldn't look good on me to wear a costume from a R-rated slasher movie. So like I was Marty McFly from Back to the Future last year. I'm like, that's probably safe. I can be Marty.
That's cool.
But there's pictures of me online of like the whole get up, and I'm like trying to kind of like carry myself like Marty McFly in the first movie. But maybe next time I'll try to be Laurie Strode. I think that'd be good.
No. I would love to see it. I would love to see it.
So this struck me as really interesting. I don't know how much you followed the work of Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, but I've listened to them my whole life. I've gone back to their archives and things. Gene Siskel really did not like horror films.
No.
Occasionally he'd give one a positive rating, a thumb up. And like very famously, Gene Siskel gave Silence of the Lambs, which we talked about last year, a thumbs down, and talked about like on the program, like that it was trashy and it's not worth your time. And Roger Ebert's like, I had some issues with the last scene, like with the end, but this is a very, very good movie, Gene. I don't know what you're talking about. And Gene's like, no, you always tell me I got it wrong. I didn't get this one wrong. And then it's like, must have been weird for him a few months later watching like the returns at the Academy Awards, like screenplay, actor. Gene's going, okay, maybe I need to go look at that one again. But he gave, I couldn't find what Roger Ebert gave Blacula, but Gene Siskel gave Blacula 3 stars out of 4.
What?
What did he say? Did I put that down? He like said some really nice things about it. And then I haven't seen it yet, obviously, but the sequel from 1973, he gave 3.5 stars out of 4. And he said that it was like a fantastic sequel that's better than the original. And I'm like, Gene Siskel gave Blacula Scream 3.5 stars. A guy who gave thumbs down to the original Scream in 1996, was just very dismissive of the genre. In almost every review I've seen of him talk about horror films. So I'm like, that's really interesting. I wonder what about the 2 Blacula films that he enjoyed, because Roger Ebert gave the sequel 1.5 stars out of 4. And he said it had poor lighting, confusing camera work, a nonsensical script. Gene Siskel said, I am pleased to report that Blacula Scream is better than the original. That's really interesting to me. I would think it'd be flipped, because Ebert really loved horror films. Famously gave Last House on the Left, which we're talking about later this month, the Wes Craven film debut, famously gave it 3.5 stars out of 4, whereas I think most critics in the country were very dismissive of Last House on the Left. So what's going on with Gene Siskel here? He's just having a good year. He likes capes. Maybe he was like a big Dracula fan. Maybe like Dracula films. Maybe he was into the Christopher Lee stuff.
Maybe he got in to the movie free because he wore a cape. And then he was like, that was worth 3 stars for a free movie. Yeah,
maybe he was visiting New York and
exactly. Chicago, New York, they're not that far apart.
I don't remember. I'm like, did they like Bram Stoker's Dracula from 92? I feel like one of them gave it a thumbs up. I'd have to look it up. But so Gene Siskel was all on board with these 2 movies and was telling everyone to go see it. So there you go. It seems like the praise for the first one, it was kind of tempered. It wasn't like everyone was saying this is the great horror film of 1972, but I feel like people did recognize that there was a little bit more craft behind this movie than your typical vampire movie. So that's good, right? And people saw it. It was a big hit, not like, top hit of the year or anything, but for the small budget, the movie did very well. Do you think it's deserving of that?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I love stories about horror films made for very little money that are successful at the box office. It always just warms my heart, especially when it's people who love the genre and want to do something interesting with it. It's one of those genres you don't need a big lead, A-list actor in the movie. Like, I haven't seen it yet, but like The Phone Booth is an example, or not the phone. Is it the what's it
Black
called?
Phone? The Black Phone.
The Black Phone. Phone Booth is the Colin Farrell movie. The Black Phone, which has been in theaters now for a few weeks. By the time this drops, it'll probably be out of theaters. It'll probably be on digital. But that's another example of a horror film it's got Ethan Hawke, but he's like the villain. I don't think you see him very well in the movie. He's kind of behind a mask. And that's another recent horror film that's done very well at the box office. By the time this drops, Nope will have come out, which I'm very excited about. Are you excited for Nope?
So excited for Nope. I can't wait.
I'm like, there's no way it's bad. You cannot call your movie Nope and have it be bad.
Nope.
Like you are setting yourself up for failure with that title. So it has to deliver in big ways, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So
especially, I mean, the whole marketing thing, they're saying it's not what you think it is. It's not what you think it is. And so now I'm just like, well, what is it? Like, if it's not what I think it is, what is it?
Do you like to watch trailers for everything that comes out, or do you try to avoid trailers?
I love trailers, but I am also somebody who, if I hear that someone knows a spoiler about something, I'll be like, tell me the spoiler.
No. I've never been
and then
that
I
way.
regret it. And then I regret it.
It kind of depends. Like if I'm just like laying around, it's a Saturday, and then a trailer pops up for a movie I'm interested in, I'll sit there and watch it. But I try to avoid like seeing everything about it. Like I'll watch the 2-minute trailer, but I try to avoid like watching a bunch of interviews and watching a bunch of behind the scenes. I try to, the more of that stuff you see, and that hurt my viewing of the 2018 Halloween a little bit, because that was the case of a movie where for like 6 months I was just watching everything I could find. I was like, any interview with Jamie Lee, oh, there's a third trailer, let's watch it. And by the time I watched the movie, there was almost nothing new. Like everything had been given away. And I recognized that. And I'm like, oh, Brian, why'd you do this to yourself?
I just did that with Scream 5. I did the exact same thing.
Yep. Yeah. I kind of was like that. I'm going to try to not do it so much with the next Scream and Halloween Ends. But Scream 5 was a case where I'm like analyzing like, oh, Neve Campbell was on the set for only like a week and a half. So she must not be in the movie that much, which she wasn't. I was like, oh, there you go. And then I mean, it's been long enough. We can give it away that Dewey is killed and halfway through the Scream 5. And I knew before that scene came that it was going to happen. I'm sitting there going, why would Sydney come back to Woodsboro?
Exactly.
There was that brief shot in the trailer
of
Gail's mouth opening wide. And I went, oh, they're going to kill Dewey. It's the only thing that makes sense why she would come back. So when they start going to the hospital, I'm sitting there, I'm going, okay, if I was the filmmaker here, there's going to be a great little battle. He's going to win. They're going to walk away, and it's been a thing from movie 1. You got to shoot him in the head. He's going to turn around. He's going to, and something's going to distract him. He's going to die. And I sat there in the theater, everything that I thought they were going to do, they did in like exact precise order over the course of 2 minutes. I was like, I could have made this movie.
Yeah.
Did that surprise you at all when Dewey died, or no?
Sort of. Emotionally, it shocked me.
I was bawling. I was a mess.
Yeah.
I was losing
but as soon as he turned back out of the elevator, I'm like, well, this is it. Like, this is clearly the part that they were teasing in the trailer. So I wouldn't say I was shocked exactly, but emotionally a wreck.
But I'm like, when they killed him, I'm like, I got kind of scared. I'm like, well, wait a second here. Like, I know from the trailer that Sydney goes in the house at the end. I'm like, if they kill her, I'm out. Like, I'm not going to be happy. So I was happy that didn't happen. But there's been all these rumors on Scream 6 and 7 that I'm trying to like sort of read. I'm like, how much better would these movies be if I could just walk in knowing nothing?
Exactly. Like, there's a new movie coming out called The Invitation. Have you seen the trailer for this?
No, I've heard of the title though, right? Is it a horror film this fall?
Yes, it's a vampire movie.
Oh, great. Okay.
Which you can clearly tell from the trailer, because the trailer, like, it basically is a 2-minute movie where you're like, okay, I think I just know the whole plot to the movie. I'll still watch it. Yeah. But it's definitely one of those ones where you're like,
well, like if I watch a trailer and it gives away everything, if there's been like a few months since I've seen the trailer, I'm usually fine. It's like if I were to watch it like the morning of it, that's where the problem would come in. But going back to Blacula, it's so funny to me. It's like even this movie gets a sequel. It's like almost every horror film, if it has any kind of success, gets at least one follow-up, right? Because they're so cheap to make. It's like, why not?
Yeah.
And
that's
now
why we have so many franchises.
I mean, it's insane. It's like is Halloween Ends going to be the end of Michael Myers? Of course not. But it feels like it is. It's like, oh, that's going to be the last one. And then it's like, these movies make so much money. There will be a few years of quiet, and then they'll come back with some other version. That's how it works. I've actually been surprised we haven't had a Nightmare on Elm Street or a Friday the 13th movie in what now? 12. What was the last one? Nightmare on Elm Street reboot was 2010. So it's been 12 years since, and then the Friday the 13th reboot was 2009. So it's been 12 years since either of them. And I thought after Halloween 2018, I'm like, they're probably going to redo Nightmare with Heather Langenkamp and do kind of a similar thing, but they never did. And I wonder why. I wonder if it has to do with like the brand, like the branding or the licenses on the character or the studio. Maybe it has something to do with that. I don't know.
I think Friday the 13th, that is the case. I know they've been tied up in some legal disputes for a long time. But yeah, I don't know anything about Nightmare. There should definitely be another Nightmare.
Like, I don't know. It's hard because it's really difficult to picture Nightmare without Robert Englund. What is he, like mid-70s now? Like, I don't know if he's going to want to be out there, like, with that makeup is tough. I don't know if he's at a stage of his life where he'd want to put it on again.
That's true.
That's true. Wes Craven is gone. It's like, I posted on Twitter like 2 months ago. I'm like, how cool would it be to see one more film with Heather Langenkamp and Robert Englund, Nightmare on Elm Street? And most of the comments were like, no, let's let it lie. Like, there's nothing more to do with it. And I'm like, I feel like with like a really gifted filmmaker, I feel like there's something more that could be done. It's been a long time since they were on screen together in Wes Craven's New Nightmare. That was 1994. But I don't know. I feel like it might be a case where too much time has passed. And so if they're going to do it, it has to be some kind of reboot, something different. But even in a small role, I would love seeing. It's not Jamie Lee Curtis isn't the only Scream Queen. It's like, I would love, even just in a small part, I would love to see Heather Langenkamp back in that world again. It'd be cool.
Yeah, it would be very cool.
Blacula.
Yeah, we keep going off on tangents here.
Horror, yeah, you get me talking about horror films that I adore, and we go off on tangents. But anyway, yeah. So Blacula comes out 50 years ago. The genre is not doing so great in 1972. We're about 18 months away from The Exorcist, which really like gave the horror genre new life and was a huge financial success, one of the big hits of the year. Got a bunch of Oscar nominations, and then we're really off and running with so many great horror films.
Oh my gosh.
We're still kind of, it's like, I call like everything I've looked at for the podcast so far is like pre-Exorcist horror films. And, I would say Blacula is one of the better ones I've looked at. Like it's just got a little bit more craft behind it. Did we like the makeup job on the vampires of the very heavily blue? Were we fans of this?
That was actually one of my things that I wrote down. Did not age so well was the makeup of the vampires. Now, that being said, a lot of them had on very heavy wigs or or they were cloaked, so you didn't see it on a lot of them.
Right.
But yeah, some of them were almost green.
Yeah, my issue with it wasn't so much the blue and the green, it was the consistency being off. Some of them looked normal. Other ones was like full, like forehead to chin, like dark blue or light blue or green. And I'm like in Dawn of the Dead by George Romero, the zombies have a little bit of like color, like a little blue, little green to their face. Yeah. But it's always a little subtle. It's not like overly done. And in this one, I think there's two scenes where a vampire comes out from the dark and it's just like, whoa, like we could have at the halfway mark applying the makeup, we could have said, okay, we're good, let's shoot. I don't know. Yeah,
there's the scene at the beginning where the original Dracula, I think his brides come out.
Oh, right. We should mention that scene.
And they have the makeup on. And then we talked about the warehouse and they come out and they have the very heavy makeup on as well. There's even the, I think it's Bobby, the one of the gay characters at the beginning where he's in the coffin and you can start to see he's going green around his jawline. I don't know how it happened so fast for him, but apparently
isn't there a scene where he comes out of the coffin and he's got like I think it's like full green, like his whole face. And is it the sister or the friend and she's like, no, don't kill him, and he's like, he's already gone.
Oh, like that's the other guy. Yeah, because yes, because they go to dig up his body to find out if he was also drained of blood. So
that's right. And
as you do,
she's like, no, don't kill him. He's already dead. Like, there'll be something I don't know. Any other scenes in the film we haven't talked about? I'm trying to think of any other, like, I mean, we get like that scene of, is it the two officers in that room where we get like 10 different vampires, maybe more, come in, and we get lots of great close-ups. And that's where the makeup isn't so consistent, but it's still like, it's like there's definitely some power to that scene. I thought that worked well.
Yeah, I think that was one of the scariest scenes. And then they leave because there's 3 of them originally, right? And they leave the one cop behind because they're like, sorry, you're gone. Like,
yeah,
we got to get out of here.
So. Yeah, it was not a good movie to be a cop. Like, it was not a good profession for Blacula. Like, Blacula there were so many parts where they like shoot at Blacula and he just turn and he'd smile and then he'd just like knock him down and the guy's just like sprawled out on the cement. I'm like, you should learn from this. Like, don't let the next cop do the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, in terms of the direction by William Crane, I think he did a good job. As I said before, there's not a whole lot of atmosphere outside of that great scene where she's developing the film. You know, most of the movie is kind of pedestrian in terms of like how it looks and things. There's nothing. It's not like, it doesn't feel like a filmmaker sitting there and like storyboarding the movie and like, okay, I'm going to really focus on every scene. How do I up the ante on the tension? And it doesn't feel like that, but it does feel like someone who has some reverence for the genre and doesn't want to just make it a joke. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, he wasn't Hitchcocking it for sure. But I think it had great pace, like a great pace to it, which we already mentioned. There aren't any scenes where you're like, oh my gosh, would this scene just end already? Yeah. I think that was something he did very well, that Crane did very well, was just kind of keeping the movie going. Even the scenes where they're a little more dialogue heavy still moved at a pretty good pace. So, and
that can happen even in a 90-minute movie. You can have scenes that go on and on and on, and you're like, this movie could have been 80 minutes. Exactly. That's when the movie's not working, when I'm like, did it have to be 90? Could we have done 80? Yeah, 77. Exactly. We could have done 77 minutes and then 10 minutes of credits. Which is something you have to think about as a filmmaker, because it's like, you can't, like under 80, can't really release it. You have to have, at least be approaching 90 minutes, but you can always get away with, we talked about Wes Craven earlier, like Wes Craven on Red Eye. I want to say Red Eye from 2005 with Rachel McAdams and Cillian Murphy. Have you seen that movie? I want to say it's 75 minutes long with 10 minutes of credits. Yeah, that's how they got it. Sounds about right. That's how they got it, like, to be released. You can't release a movie now that's like 75 minutes long. It's a little too short.
Yeah, the only thing that I can think of is Host, but wasn't released like in the theaters. It was just released to streaming services, right? So
right, maybe if it's streaming, maybe if it goes straight to Shudder or something, you could be like 75 80 minutes, probably fine. But if it's like a theatrical movie, I feel like there's a certain minute you have to reach.
yeah Or like, people will riot.
Yeah, you imagine you go to the movies and it's like some important director and it's like 62 minutes long. You're like, well, I've got my whole afternoon ahead of me. Some movies I've seen, I'm like, I wish this was 62 minutes long. Right?
Oh yeah.
When they hit that 2.5 hour mark, you're like, okay, let's wrap it up. So yeah, as we get to the end of our conversation about Blacula, what do you think it would be like if made today? Like, if there's been talk of doing a reboot, like, do we have it resemble the tone of this movie, or do we completely update it to modern times and have it feel kind of like the Candyman reboot and have it be much more contemporary and like, but with the title Blacula? Like, how do we do that? What do you think?
I think you're either going to go one of two ways. You're either going to go super high camp and like play it up, or you're going to do the Jordan Peele, Nia DaCosta kind of route and make it very serious. Despite the, I mean, we just talked about Nope. I'm sure Nope is going to have some serious social commentary in it if it's a Jordan Peele movie.
Yep.
If it's a Jordan Peele movie, like, it's under debate.
So Jordan Peele's so much in demand now that his name is being put on a lot of productions. I remember at the beginning, I thought he was directing Candyman, and then oh no, he's just producing it. But sometimes they pump up the name so much in posters and advertising that for a moment you think, oh, he's direct. Oh no, he's just producing. So Nope is his third directorial film, right? After Get Out and Us. Yeah. So by the time this drops, Nope will have been out for 2 to 3 weeks. And I imagine, I mean, I'm going to be very sad and disappointed if it's not good. I imagine it'll be one of the top films of the summer. Like, I think it's going to be really, really, from what I've seen, I think I've watched one trailer. It looks like it's more science fiction than it is like horror, but we'll see. But I would love to see what would he do with Blacula. That would be very interesting.
That would be very interesting.
I'd be there on day one. I'd be like, what's Jordan Peele going to do with Blacula? I feel like if you keep that title, I feel like it has to be kind of campy. I don't know how you do a modern day Blacula and have it be very scary and very serious. I just feel like that title kind of screws with you a little bit. I don't know. In terms of just like audience expectations today, I feel like they'd be expecting something a little bit campier. Right. So if you were to just deliver this really just fantastic, brutal, R-rated, scary movie, I mean, I guess it could work, but I do think the audience expectations would have to be subverted in some way. I don't know.
I'm trying to think if there's something similar where I can think of a movie that has kind of a goofy title.
Yeah, like of any genre. I'm trying to think, like, is there a movie that was remade and made maybe better, made more serious and more scary or blah, 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 and had a goofy title from like an old 70s, 60s? I don't think there might be one or two if we really researched and thought about, but it's pretty unlikely. Probably not much.
True enough.
So we'll see if they make a reboot. I would love to see it. I'm always interested to see how they reboot things, as long as they don't take something like really just like something that's already perfect. Like, that's like, I'm like, just leave it alone. But I feel like Blacula, there's room for a new story in this world. I'd be curious to see what they would do with it in the 2020s. I think it doesn't feel right to just go full on camp, but it doesn't feel right either to have it just be like just genuinely terrifying.
Right.
I feel like it would have to be something in between, kind of like what we get in the 72.
Yeah.
Right. So I'd be curious, but then it's like, but if you're going to reboot something, why do it the same? Like, you'd want to do something different with it. So I don't know. We shall see. So anything else you wanted to say about Blacula? I would give this 3 out of 4 stars. I had a good time. It's a quick, easy watch, a great charismatic lead performance, some good scares, a little clunky here and there. I thought the last 20 minutes, it was like I wanted more atmosphere. I thought the ending could have had a little bit more power to it, but I was interested enough in this material and this world. I'm curious to see the sequel from 73.
Yeah, I would give it a 3 out of 4 stars as well. I would agree with Siskel on this one.
I never agreed with Siskel, but we're agreeing with Siskel today. I'd always agree more with Roger Ebert almost all the time, especially since Ebert much more appreciated the horror genre. But I don't know what was going on with him in 72, 73. He was on board with the scary movies. So good on you, Siskel. We like that. All right, so that takes us to our final 2 segments. The first one's the Divine Double Feature. So Blacula ends. What would you suggest that we pair it with? Something more modern. What did you pick for that?
Well, I had 2 suggestions that I would pair it with. If I'm just going strictly like a film, I would do Vampires versus the Bronx, which just came out.
I don't know this movie. Tell me about it.
Well, so it came out in, I think 2020, maybe 2021.
Okay.
But it's about a group of like young teenagers in New York, in the Bronx, obviously. And they discover that vampires are real, and it's basically how they fight them. And it's like a horror comedy. So it's entertaining. So I thought, kind of big city vampires, young, I want to say they're I'm trying to remember because I haven't seen it.
Is it like I'm assuming it's like an indie film, went straight to streaming?
Yep. I believe so, yeah.
How did you hear about the movie? Like, where did you find it?
It's on Netflix.
Oh, it was on Netflix. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I just think that would be a good pairing. But I also thought if you wanted to see the evolution of Black horror, you couldn't go wrong with watching Blacula and then watch the documentary Horror Noir.
Oh, right. Which is on Shudder. I watched that. That was great.
Yeah.
There's so many gems on Shudder. I once a week at least, I'll just go on there and just kind of see what's new. And I have a watch list on there that's, I think, 40 titles long that I haven't gotten to.
Same.
I did get to that one. That was great. There was another one about the history of like horror films from the 80s I watched. It was like 4 hours
In Search
long.
of Darkness.
So I loved every second. I was like, this is my jam in every way. And there's this part 2 I haven't watched yet. Is it
which
the
is
same
also
thing?
4 hours long? Yep, it is.
They just do they dig into the same movies, or it's like other movies?
It's other movies, so it's more like obscure, smaller movies for the most part. And then they're working on a horror movies of the 90s, I believe, next.
Oh, like a part 3 about the 90s. Oh, yep. Cool. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of great horror content from like 92 to 95. Like there was kind of this period. So I'll be curious to see like what films they bring up from those years that I might not be aware of that might be really good.
Yeah, the 90s were pretty much a wasteland for horror for the first half of the decade.
Yeah, and then Scream comes out and just completely changes the game. And then the next 5 years, we get all these teen slasher films. And it's amazing how the success of one movie can change the landscape for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Like if there had never been a Scream, if Kevin Williamson just had not written that, like I wonder what horror films from 97 to 01 would have looked like.
I mean, you wouldn't have got such gems as I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Last summer. I posted about that movie the other day on Twitter, and I had so many people say, "Oh, that's not a good movie. It's just your nostalgia talking to you. That movie's terrible." I Know What You Did Last Summer. Yes, it's not one of the great horror films, but I adore that movie. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, it is so much fun. I agree.
And yes, maybe nostalgia plays a part. I saw it opening weekend when I was about to turn 13. And I'll never forget seeing that opening weekend in a crowded theater opening weekend. That was a lot of fun.
See, I'm gonna say
when it comes through the glass.
It can't be well, I mean, for me, it can't be nostalgia because I resisted watching that movie until we covered it on my podcast this year.
You had never seen it?
I'd never seen it.
Oh, wow. Okay. What was it like watching it for the first time in recent years?
Ridiculous, but fun. Like I really enjoyed it. But I had said, I'm not watching this movie. I remember when it came out, I'm like, I'm not watching this movie because this is a cheap Scream ripoff and I refuse. Did that stop me from watching, all the other cheap Scream ripoffs that came out in the 90s? No. Something about I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Remember there was controversy because the first trailer said from the creator of Scream in the trailer for I Know What You Did Last Summer, and they got like sued or something came up like because they said people are going to think you're talking about Wes Craven. No, it's written by Kevin Williamson. So they had I think they had to put from the writer of Scream. But I just found out a couple days ago that the famous scene of Jennifer Love Hewitt screaming, "What are you waiting for?" was directed by a child.
Yes.
I had never heard of that before. He
won a contest. Yeah.
Was not in the script?
Nope. Was not in the script.
He won a contest. I'm like, how many movies have they allowed that though? Like, I'm assuming if the scene had been terrible, they would have just left it on the cutting room floor. But it worked, and they went, okay, we'll use it. I mean, Jennifer Love Hewitt sells that part. She makes it work. But I'm like, that wasn't in the script. That was a child directing. Like, let's do this. And it's like the most famous scene of the movie.
And now that kid is a famous director. No, I don't think he is.
That's funny. So my choice is my favorite vampire film of the last decade, which is A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. Have you seen that movie from 2014? Yes. Anna Lily Amapour, I believe her name is. She's done some great work, and I want to say that's probably one of the creepiest vampire movies ever made. Just like the black and white, talk about atmospheric, just you don't know where it's going. It's kind of slow, but in that really great kind of like way that promotes dread in a really great horror movie, and terrific cast. And I love the look of that film. It's just very unusual and beautiful. And it might not pair great with Blacula, but if you wanted to see like a more modern kind of indie vampire movie that's doing interesting things with the genre, check out that movie. A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. I remember putting it on knowing almost nothing, and I was just really drawn in, and I haven't stopped thinking about it. It's a great movie. I didn't see it like the year it came out. I want to say I saw it in like 2018, maybe. But when I finally got around to it, I was just like, oh, this looks kind of interesting. I think I'd seen the director's film. I want to say it's the Bad Batch. Is that a movie? I think that's another movie the director made in like 2017. And I was like, what else is this director made? And I read about A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, and I rented it, and it was just like blown away. It was so good.
That was another movie that I picked for my 31 Days of Horror in October. Not this October. I think it was 2 years ago that I did it.
Have you picked out your movies for 2022 yet?
No, not yet. Not yet. I usually save that till September.
Oh, okay.
But
I sit down in every December, I sit down and I map out like the films that I'm going to do for the podcast for the entirety of the year. And then occasionally I'll like drop one for another movie. That happens every 2 to 3 months. I'll like drop one and I'll pick something else. But for the most part, I like to start like the year of the podcast, like with a clear idea of like what we're talking about. So it was December 2021. I said, we are talking Blacula in August.
Wow, that is disciplined. I am not that disciplined when it comes to my podcast.
That's how I've always been. I like to be organized. Like, what are we looking at? But that's, I actually really like that idea. I might do that, not for the podcast or something, but just for fun. I would like, it'd be really fun to do this October would be to pick 31 horror films from the last 100 years that I've never seen.
Ooh,
probably not anything from 72, 73, because I'll end up talking about it for the podcast. But maybe find 31 films on Shudder, streaming, other places that I can have easy access to, and just watch one a night for 31 days. That'd be really fun. And just maybe 20 of them won't be good, but maybe if I could find out of 31 horror films I haven't seen, if I could find 5 that I really love, that'd be great. So that'd be fun. I'll just go on Shudder and just pick the 31 I want to watch.
There you go. Save Scream Blacula Scream for October.
Scream Blacula Scream. I didn't see when it came out. I'm assuming it's probably like August to October of 73.
I feel like it was 73, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know it's 73. I just don't know what part of the year. I'm always intrigued when a horror film comes out in like April. It's like I'm like,
or January.
Yeah, it's like, well, January makes sense sometimes because it's not as busy. So True. Like I saw why they brought out Scream 5 the second week of January, because there wasn't really anything else playing. And so that it becomes a big hit. It's harder if like Scream 5 had come out, Halloween weekend. It actually might hinder it. It might not do as well as it would have in January, which is weird to think. But. All right, that takes us to our final segment, Beyond the Flick. I thought we'd talk about our favorite Dracula adaptations. So you said you're a big Dracula fan. So
I am a big Dracula fan.
Like, there's been dozens. Like, what are your top 3 favorites? If you could take 3 to a desert island, what are the 3?
Oh my gosh, this was really, really hard for me, Brian. But I went with the original Dracula by Todd Browning, starring Bela Lugosi, because he kind of set that blueprint for capes and widow's peaks and all of those things. And like, so it's so atmospheric. Like the whole movie is just, it exudes atmosphere. Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yep.
Because I, was a teenager in the 90s. And so growing up, I loved Winona Ryder. I loved Keanu Reeves. And I thought it was the dreamiest vampire movie ever.
Yeah. With like really high production values.
Oh, like the costumes are like so gorgeous. And you talk about a very different vampire brides, Dracula's brides. So you've got the very like beautiful, well-dressed Dracula's brides versus, Blacula's brides and Dracula's brides. And that soundtrack is incredible. And then lastly, I would say the very first Dracula movie, even though they were sued and had to take the name Dracula off of it, Nosferatu.
Okay. Yep. We have the exact same 3 movies.
Seriously?
Those are the 3. I've seen a couple other ones. I like the Nosferatu version of the 70s by Herzog. Frank Langella is in a pretty solid Dracula movie. I've only seen the only Christopher Lee Dracula movie I've seen is the first one, Horror of Dracula. It's the only one I've seen. And so before we talk about Dracula 1972 AD in October, I'm going to try to look at least 2 of the other because I think he's in like 7 or 8 of them. Like there's a bunch.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to see at least 1 or 2 others. So that's a good film. But yeah, I would pick Bram Stoker's Dracula. I'm like, has there been a great adaptation since 1992? Like there's a 4-episode, I want to say, Netflix Dracula from 2020.
Right.
I have not seen that. Have you seen it?
I have not seen it either.
But I'm like, it's like weird to me. In the last 20 years, there's not been a great Dracula movie. Nothing. I'm like, there's Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman. That was terrible.
It's really bad.
That movie was bad. So, and then we've had like, there was the Mummy reboot in 2017. So they were like moving into maybe doing another Dracula, but then Mummy bombed so bad critically and financially that they didn't make any others. So, and then they were going to do Bride of Frankenstein and they got close, I think, and then it just fell through. So I don't know. I'd like to think in the next 10 years we'll get like a theatrical Dracula movie of some kind, but it's been a while. I like Bram Stoker's Dracula. I'm doing a video about League of Their Own, and I'm researching the 1992 Oscars, and I forgot Bram Stoker's Dracula won 3 Academy Awards. It won costume design, sound effects, editing, and makeup. So it was very popular at the Oscars that year, like a horror film, which is kind of unheard of. You don't see that very much. And then the Dracula with Bela Lugosi is great. We did an episode about last year. I think the opening 20 minutes of that movie is perfection. I think everything after that is just good. Like the opening stuff in the castle is just like amazing. Talk about atmosphere. And then it's like the rest of it gets a little, little slower, more human characters, and Dracula's not in it as much. I don't think that's the case. They're all getting on my back for I Know What You Did Last Summer. I do think the 1931 Dracula, we all have this, horror fans look to that as one of the great movies of all time. I think if you actually sit and watch it, it's solid. But in terms of Dracula adaptations, you just cannot get around the Bela Lugosi performance. It's just, there's nothing like it. It's so great.
And even like, I can't think of the actor who played him, but the character of Renfield in that.
Oh, right.
Like he's just absolutely bonkers. And you see him start as this normal guy and just descend into madness.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah. But I think if I had to pick the best one, and it's not an easy watch because it's a silent film, but the 1922 Nosferatu is just amazing. And to see what they did, and it's kind of, 100 years ago, like we're talking 100 years ago, a movie that everyone affiliated with it is long gone. And the art of it still holds up today. And it's just beautifully shot. And Max Schreck, his performance, there's nothing like it in film history of any kind ever. Like it's just one of a kind performance, and it's still creepy and eerie today, just as it was then. I'm like talking about seeing a movie when it came out. Like imagine being an audience in 1922 watching that in the theater.
Right?
Would have been terrifying.
Yeah.
So the fact that it still holds up 100 years on, that's saying a lot. It's great. It's one of my favorites.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
It's not my favorite silent film, but it's definitely in the top 5. My favorite is The Passion of Joan of Arc from 1928. That movie is amazing. Best silent film I've ever seen. Really? But yeah, I mean, Nosferatu, it's up there with Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which I also adore. So cool.
That's a great movie.
Battleship Potemkin and Greed, and there's some good ones. It's really tough in today's lightning, fast-paced day and age to like actually sit and watch a silent film. It's tough to like put the phone away, read the title cards. It's tough, but Nosferatu, it is worth it. Do it. It is so much fun.
Agreed. Yeah.
All right, so that takes us to the end here, Sherri. Thanks for being back on Film at 50. It was so much fun to talk Blacula with you, and I would love to have you on again at some point, talk another scary movie or something. We've always had a good time on the podcast together, and I really adored our conversation last year about Strangers on a Train. It was so much fun. I love talking Hitchcock, and I remember we recorded that. I forgot to mention this. We recorded that episode. Pat Hitchcock was still with us, And when the episode dropped in September, she had passed away.
Really?
It was really weird. Yeah, I think we recorded that in June. I think I was trying to time it with the release date of the movie, which I think wasn't until either August or September. By the time the episode finally came out, Pat Hitchcock, who was, of course, Alfred Hitchcock's daughter, plays a big role in Strangers on a Train, her biggest role in a movie. She had passed away by the time the episode dropped. So I thought that was interesting. She was 93. She lived a full life. But it was such a treat to talk Hitchcock with you, and kind of, I think we dug through every scene of that movie. We just went through the scene.
I think we did.
And we just had such a great time. So it's always fun to have you on. Great to have you back today for Blacula as we wrap up here. Talk to me about your podcast and anything you'd like to promote. Now would be the time.
Yeah. So Scaredy Cats, the podcast, theoretically comes out bi-weekly, but I've had some stuff going on in real life that has prevented that. But we've also started doing a monthly book episode that we're calling The Haunted Library, or Scaredy Cats Presents The Haunted Library, where we just talk about a scary book, or we've had a couple interviews with some authors, which is pretty fun too. So is
that part of the Scaredy Cats podcast? Okay.
It is. Yeah. So we'll be having one come out soon about a book by Bentley Little called Gloria.
Okay.
Actually, by the time this comes
out, I know
that
author's name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We'll be having some more fun episodes coming up, and you're going to come on for Friday the 13th.
Yes. I would love to talk Friday the 13th with you. That is awesome. Friday the 13th series is not even close to being my favorite in terms of like Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, but it's a different kind of joy I get from the Friday the 13th movies that we'll talk about. Like, they're just so batshit crazy.
Exactly.
And as the sequels go on, it just is like nonsensical. And that's what makes it fun.
So ridiculous. Yeah.
So yeah, we'll definitely talk about that. The Haunted Library is the title of the first short story I ever wrote.
Really?
When I was like in second grade. The first one that I remember, I probably wrote other little things before. The first one, like I typed like on the screen. This would have been like 91, 92, somewhere around there. And I remember I shared it. We were like writing fiction in one of my elementary school classes, and it was like, I remember I thought of the title and I thought of a plot. Like, I think the librarian dies at the beginning when she haunts the library and haunts the kids and stuff. And I remember it ended with an explosion, because back then I thought you had to end a story with the building exploding. So I think the library exploded. That's my memory. But it was the first story, amazing. Like I typed it, like I had my name, the title, my name, and I typed it out, like double space, and I read it to the class like the next day. And it was called The Haunted Library. So I love that title for your
then
monthly.
You have to come on and talk about a book at some point then.
Try to rewrite the story and share it again.
For Halloween.
Halloween. Yeah, we're recording this in July. When this drops, it'll be August. And then before we know it, Sherri, it'll be October. Definitely one of my favorite months of the year.
Same.
It's my birthday month. It's Halloween month. I always wonder, like, because I was born at the end of October, like, did that in some ways propel me into being a horror movie fan? Or is that just a coincidence?
You were just born into the vibe of Halloween.
Like, every birthday party from when I remember, it would be a birthday / Halloween party. And so I just, like, from being a little kid, it was just always a part of my being was Halloween and October. It was always kind of my thing, because everyone else in my family is June. It's like insane. It's almost everyone is between June 1st to 30th. And then there's little old me in late October, which I've always kind of admired that. I've always loved that I'm like, oh, I'm on the other side of the calendar, and not just any month, Halloween month. So it's part of the reason why I love the genre. Love talking horror films on Film at 50 and elsewhere. So thanks for being here today, Sherri. Thanks all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Check out my YouTube channel, Brian Rowe Video. And until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.